Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So the entire Riveteer's Rampage Precon with Henzie at the helm has been revealed. And today I'm going to be walking you through some fantastic upgrade options for the deck. So if you're looking to pick up this deck and power it up, this should help. I'm also going to be breaking the upgrades down into different budget tiers. I realize that many players have different budgets when it comes to Magic, so I hope this is helpful. But with all that said, let's jump into it. So the commander for the Riveteer's Rampage Precon deck is Henzie Toolbox Torre. Henzie is a 3/3 Devil Rogue that costs black, red, green. He has each creature spell you cast with mana value 4 or greater has Blitz. The Blitz cost is equal to its mana cost. Now, Blitz is a new mechanic from this set, and it means you may choose to cast that spell for its Blitz cost. If you do, it gains haste, and when this creature dies, draw a card, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. On top of that, Blitz cost you pay costs 1 less for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone this game. So the more times that we cast Henzie from the command zone, the more savings we get on our creatures that have a mana value of 4 or greater when we blitz them in. And again, by blitzing them into play, we're able to be aggressive with those creatures because they have haste, and at the end of the turn, we do have to sacrifice them, but we do get to draw a card, so essentially that creature is replaced. Now, there are a lot of powerful things that we can do this commander and some very powerful synergies. And there are different directions you can take this commander, such as an aggressive strategy, an aristocrat-style strategy, and even a combo strategy. That being said, many of the upgrades I'm going to be highlighting in this episode can help out in a lot of different ways. So let's jump into our most budget-friendly upgrades that are less than $2, starting with cards like Garruk's Pack Leader and Soul the Harvest. Garruk's Pack Leader is a 4/4 beast that costs 4 and a green. It says whenever another creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. Once you get things going with this deck and you're set up properly, you can gain a ton of card advantage with something like this. A deck like this is going to run a good amount of creatures that have a higher mana value, again because our commander does benefit us for doing so, and when we do that, we definitely have some creatures that have 3 or greater power as well. So in addition to the card that we're going to be drawing from the blitzed creatures, we also can gain a ton of card advantage from something like this. And yeah, for just 23 cents, that's a really good deal. Next up, coming in just under $1 at 97 cents is Soul the Harvest, a 6/6 with trample that costs 4 green. It says whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. So whereas Garruk's Pack Leader has that power restriction, this one doesn't have any restriction except that the creature needs to be non-token, and this deck is going to be getting a lot of non-token creatures into play very quickly. Also, keep in mind that if we need these creatures in play just temporarily, we can get them into play quickly again by blitzing them out and saving some mana on them, and then getting other creatures into play after that to draw some cards. And again, by blitzing creatures, we are going to be sacrificing them, so we can also gain extra card advantage with things like Harvester of Souls, Grim Haruspex, and Midnight Reaper. Harvester of Souls is a 5/5 with Death Touch, and it says whenever another non-token creature dies, you may draw a card. At 86 cents, this card can draw us an absurd amount of cards in a game, especially considering that it's not just counting our own non-token creatures, but our opponents as well. So yeah, when we blitz our creatures in and have to sacrifice them eventually, we're going to be drawing additional cards, and again, if our opponent's creatures happen to die as well, we get to keep drawing from that too. Next up, Grim Haruspex might not meet that 4 mana value requirement for our commander, but we might not want to blitz this one in anyways because it says whenever another non-token creature you control dies, draw a card. So this is a very low to the ground creature that we can get out early, and we can gain a ton of value with it throughout the game. Next up, we've got Midnight Reaper, a 3/2 zombie knight that says whenever another non-token creature you control dies, Midnight Reaper deals 1 damage to you and you draw a card. 1 life for 1 card is a deal I will make any day of the week in Commander, and yeah, like Grim Haruspex and Harvester of Souls, this can draw us a ton of cards throughout the game. Speaking of which, coming in at just 24 cents, we've got Molder Vine Reclamation. It's an enchantment that says whenever a creature you control dies, you gain 1 life and draw a card. So obviously this can gain us a ton of life throughout the game, which is nice, but more importantly, it's going to be drawing us a card every single time one of our creatures dies, and again, when we're blitzing creatures left and right, we can draw a ton of cards with that. On top of that, for the most part, enchantments are one of the hardest permanent types to remove, so yeah, this can stay in play for quite some time for us, hopefully. And then Fecundity is another great add for this deck at just 50 cents. It's an enchantment for just 2 and a green, and it says whenever a creature dies, that creature's controller may draw a card. Now, yes, this does benefit our opponents as well, but believe me, we're going to be taking more advantage of this. Once we're set up properly, with how quickly we can churn through our creatures, we can draw an absurd amount of cards with this throughout the game. Moving on though, thanks to our commander's cost reduction for our bigger creatures, we can get a lot of value out of cards like Overseer of the Damned, Butcher of Malakir, and Terastodon. Overseer of the Damned comes in at just 33 cents, it's a 5/6 flyer, and when it enters the battlefield we can destroy target creature. On top of that, whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, we create a tap 2/2 black zombie creature token. So obviously, the more times that we cast our commander from the command zone, the more reduction we get with this, and by blitzing it out, we can take out a creature right away and get some additional value when our opponent's creatures die. And you know, swinging with a hasty 5/5 flyer is never a bad thing. Moving on though, Butcher of Malakir is incredible for just 29 cents. It's a 5/4 flyer that says whenever it or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Now if we hardcast this and keep it in play, it can absolutely decimate our opponents over and over again. Again, we gain a lot of value by getting creatures into play and sacrificing them, and because of that, we're going to be removing our opponent's creatures very quickly with this. But even if we just want to have one big explosive turn, we can of course blitz this in and then blitz in some other creatures to force our opponents to sacrifice a lot of creatures unexpectedly. Again, once we're set up properly and get things going, our commander can reduce the cost of our creatures a ton. Next up though, we've got Terastodon at just 20 cents, a 9/9 elephant that has, when it enters the battlefield, it may destroy up to 3 target non-creature permanents. And for each permanent put into a graveyard this way, its controller creates a 3/3 green elephant creature token. So this can actually be a very flexible card. This is a fantastic creature in a lot of circumstances. Again, a 9/9, especially if we blitz it out with haste, that's quite fun to swing with. But more importantly, it can take out 3 key non-creature permanents, or if we really need to, we can take out some of our own things to ensure that we have some creatures on the board. Which again, we could benefit from this with some card draw as well, with something like a Garruk's Pack Leader in play, or a Fecundity, etc, etc, etc. But speaking of big plays and big turns, let's talk about cards like Karametra's Acolyte and Elena Kessig Trapper. Mana dorks like these that have a converted mana cost of 4 or greater and can generate us a ton of mana can be incredibly impactful in this deck. Karametra's Acolyte comes in at just 29 cents, and yeah, it's a 1/4 that can tap 10 amount of green equal to our devotion to green. So the more green pips we have in play, the more this generates, and yeah, again, after we cast our commander a couple of times, let's say even 3 times, we can just cast this for just 1 mana. It's gonna have haste, and we can tap it right away for a lot more mana than we put into it. Speaking of which, there's Elena Kessig Trapper, which just costs 7 cents, a 4/3 first strike human scout. She has tap and an amount of red equal to the greatest power among creatures you control that entered the battlefield this turn. As you've seen, we've had some creatures that have some massive power, and yeah, again, we can cast this for very cheaply after we cast our commander a couple of times, and it's gonna have haste, and we can tap it right away for a ton of mana. And we'll start talking about some ways to recur creatures here in a bit, and with that, mana dorks like these can be incredibly impactful. Next up, some ways to gain some nice additional value are with cards like Tangleroot, Thermopod, and Ruthless Knave. Tangleroot comes in at 87 cents, and its Oracle text reads, whenever a player casts a creature spell, that player adds green. So, like Fecundity, yes, this might help out our opponents, but believe me, it's going to help us out a lot more. Again, in addition to the cost reduction that our commander is going to give our creatures when we blitz them out, we also are going to gain mana when we cast them now thanks to this. So, certain creatures, even like a Karametra's Acolyte, might even be free to cast essentially because, well, if we've got 3 cost reduction and then we gain a green when we cast it, we basically just got our mana back. You know, plus all the mana that we get when we tap it too. So with this in play, things can get pretty absurd. Speaking of which, Thermopod is coming in at just 81 cents, and it is a slug that has sacrifice a creature, add a red to your mana pool. Sacrifice outlets can be massive with a commander like this. And this one especially can be very potent. Again, not only can you sacrifice any creature for free whenever you want to, but when you do again, if you blitz that creature, well, you get to draw that card right away. And of course, with that, with Thermopod, you get a mana for that as well, which can of course then help you blitz in the next creature, and you see where this is going. And also, actually getting rid of our commander can be very important as well. Most decks really don't like when their commander is sent back to the command zone, but we very much do, especially when we can get some extra value out of it with something like this. Speaking of which, another sacrifice outlet, though it's not free, is Ruthless Knave, and it is fantastic in this deck as well at 32 cents. It's a 3/2 orc pirate that has paid 2 and a black, sacrifice a creature, create 2 treasure tokens. So we get nearly the amount of mana that we put into this back by sacrificing that creature, and again we can store up those treasures for when we need them. Moving on, some other free sacrifice outlets that can really be impactful in this stack are cards like Greater Good coming in at $1.82 and Goblin Bombardment coming in at 69 cents. Greater Good is an enchantment that says, sacrifice a creature, draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power, then discard 3 cards. Again, with this deck, we can blitz in some big creatures for not much mana, and sacrifice them to draw a card, with that blitz, and then also draw cards equal to their power and discard 3 cards. So we can churn through our deck very quickly with this and dig to the right cards that we need while generating a ton of card advantage. And then Goblin Bombardment is also a free sacrifice outlet. It's an enchantment for 1 and a green that says sacrifice a creature, Goblin Bombardment deals 1 damage to any target. This can be a fantastic way to ping down our opponent's creatures or, ping them in the face. But again, a free sacrifice outlet can be very impactful, letting us sacrifice our commander when we want to get back to the command zone or, taking advantage of that blitz draw right away. One card that is absolutely incredible and even broken once we're set up properly is Decaying Soil. This card is just 32 cents and it's an older card from Odyssey, so I'll read the Oracle text. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, exile a card from your graveyard, and threshold, as long as 7 or more cards are in your graveyard, Decaying Soil has, whenever a non-token creature is put in your graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay 1. If you do, return that card to your hand. The amount of value that this can generate, well, if we're set up properly, can actually just be infinite. But yeah, even without going infinite, this card is incredible once we've got threshold. Again, our commander can reduce the cost quite a bit for our creatures, sometimes making them cost just 1 or, even no mana, but we'll talk about that here in a bit. But yeah, say we're blitzing in a creature for 1 mana, we get whatever benefits we get from it, entering the battlefield, and then we can utilize it. If it's a Mandork, we tap it for mana, we sacrifice it with an outlet, and then we actually get even more card advantage out of it by it dying, and then whatever else we have in play, we pay the 1 to bring it back to our hand. And yeah, again, if that is a Mandork that can tap for more than 2 essentially, this can go infinite. Or I should say, as long as the Mandork is tapping for its own color. You know what I mean. Karametra's Acolyte, Elena are definitely ones that can go crazy with this. Next up though, another enchantment that can really help us out and provide a lot of value is No Rest for the Wicked. By sacrificing it, we can return to our hand all creature cards that were put into our graveyard from play this turn. So yeah, for 98 cents, this 2-mana enchantment can do a lot of work for this deck. Next up, slightly more expensive, just over $1 at $1.22, we've got Creeping Renaissance. It's a sorcery that says choose a permanent type, return all cards of the chosen type from your graveyard to your hand, and we can flash it back for 5 green. So this can help us get back a massive amount of creatures at once, and then we of course can do it again. Moving on though, next up we've got a 14-cent card that is incredible in this deck with Ancestral Statue. It is a 3/4 artifact creature golem that just costs 4 mana, and when it enters the battlefield, return a non-land permanent you control to its owner's hand. So if we can cast our commander 4 times, which is very doable in this deck, we can get this to cost 0 by blitzing it in. And when we blitz it in, of course, it has that trigger and it actually can bounce itself back to our hand with that trigger. And then, if we've got something like Soul the Harvest or Garruk's Pack Leader or any of those ETB triggers in play, we get that an infinite number of times. Or, I should say, as many times as we want. So we can essentially draw our entire deck with those, and yeah, there are a lot of fantastic things we can do with this. Speaking of which, Biblioplex Assistant is just a 1-cent card that can really help this deck out. It is a 2/1 flying gargoyle that costs 4 mana, and it has, when it enters the battlefield, put up to 1 target insert a sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library. So again, you can essentially blitz this in for free once you're set up properly, and it can get back a fantastic card like maybe a Creeping Renaissance for us to cast again to get our creatures back again. But next up, for just 11 cents, we've got Garner the Bloodflame, which is fantastic in this deck. A 3/3 human warrior with flash that has, when it enters the battlefield, return to your hand all creature cards in your graveyard that were put there from anywhere this turn, and other creatures you control have haste. So if we aren't blitzing a creature in, Garner's still going to give our other creatures haste, so again with our mana dorks, if we just hardcast them, we can get that value right away. But the more important part is that trigger, which again can get back to our hand all creature cards in our graveyard that were put there from anywhere this turn, so yeah. With this deck, blitzing in creatures, sacrificing them for value, and then getting them all back to our hand with this is incredible. And that's not even all, because if we've got a sacrifice outlet in play, we can actually sacrifice Garna while its trigger is on the stack for Garna to get itself back with its own trigger. This is pretty bonkers, and yeah, when set up properly, you can definitely go infinite with this and some mana dorks, and yeah, it can be a very powerful play. Moving on, some other upgrades to consider depending on what direction you're taking this deck. Let's talk about some cards like Genesis Storm and Skull Storm. Genesis Storm is just 35 cents, and it says, when you cast this spell, copy it for each time you've cast your commander for the command zone this game. Reveal cards from the top of your library to reveal a non-land permanent card. You may put that card onto the battlefield, then put all cards revealed this way that weren't put onto the battlefield on the bottom of your library in a random order. Again, many decks built around this commander are going to plan to cast this commander a lot. So when you do, by casting this, you can get a ton of value out of it by copying it a lot based off of each time you've cast your commander. Speaking of which, Skullstorm is a 67-cent card that is somewhat similar. It's a sorcerer that says, when you cast a spell, copy it for each time you've cast your commander for the command zone this game. So that's the same, but this one says each opponent sacrifices a creature. Each opponent who can't loses half their life rounded up. So this can make our opponent sacrifice a ton of creatures, and if they don't have enough creatures, they start losing half their life, then half again, and again. And yeah, this can be a very powerful effect. Moving forward, let's move on to some upgrades that are between $2 and $10 though, and we're going to start off with cards like Elemental Bond and Myth Unbound. Elemental Bond is an enchantment that says, whenever a creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. So this is basically the enchantment $2.95 version of Garruk's Pack Leader. But yeah, in a deck like this, it can draw us a ton of cards. Next up, Myth Unbound is a $2.40 enchantment that says, your commander costs 1 less to cast for each time it's been cast from the command zone this game. And whenever your commander is put into the command zone from anywhere, draw a card. So this can be a ton of commander tax savings. Again, if we're planning on getting rid of our commander and recasting it a lot, this can save us a lot of mana. And on top of that, when our commander does die and go to the command zone, we draw a card. So this can help us with our game plan in a very impactful way. Speaking of which, some cards that are very impactful, but just underneath that $10 mark are Korvold at $9.31 and Skullclamp at $9.79. Korvold has, whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, sacrifice another permanent, and whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a +1 counter on Korvold and draw a card. So this can be a heavy hitter that can help us sacrifice permanents, and of course when we do sacrifice permanents, this gets bigger, and also, and more importantly, we draw cards. And speaking of drawing cards, Skullclamp is absurd in this deck. It's an equipment for just 1 mana that just costs 1 to equip. It gives a creature +1/-1 and says when equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards. So even at a minimum, just attaching this for 1 mana to a blitzed creature, when that creature dies at the end of the turn, instead of just drawing 1 card, we draw 3. But yeah, if we're set up properly with a free sacrifice outlet in play, we can essentially just pay 1 extra mana for all of our creatures that we're going to be sacrificing to draw 2 more cards. Moving on though, let's talk about some creatures with some powerful ETBs that you might want to consider, with Avatar of Growth at $5.53 and Bane of Progress at $4.65. Avatar of Growth is a 4/4 that's going to cost 1 less to cast for each opponent we have, and it's got Trample, and when it enters the battlefield, each player searches their library for up to 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield, then shuffles their library. Note that those basic lands don't come into play tapped, so we can utilize them right away. And yeah, I mean, again, assuming that we've got 3 opponents, still around, and we just cast our commander once, we can blitz this in for just green, so it essentially pays for itself and ramps us permanently. Next up, Bane of Progress can help us out in a different way. It's a 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, we destroy all artifacts and enchantments, and we put a +1 counter on Bane of Progress for each permanent destroyed this way. So this can wipe out a ton of things and become absolutely massive. Then again, if we blitz this in and an opponent doesn't have any blockers, we can swing for a ton with this. On top of wiping some boards. But moving on, last up in this budget range, we've got Fury Storm, which comes in at $5.90. Again, if you're taking the deck in the direction of casting your commander a lot, this can be very impactful. It says, when you cast this spell, copied for each time you've cast your commander for the commands on this game, you may choose new targets for the copies. Copy target instant or sorcery spell, you may choose new targets for the copy. So this is a copy spell that is going to copy a ton. The more we cast our commander, the more copies we get, and the bigger the impact this can have. But yeah, now let's move on to the high roller section, cards that are $10 and up. Ashnod's Altar is absolutely fantastic in this deck, a $15 card right now. It says sacrifice a creature, add colors to your mana pool. Again, free sacrifice outlets can be very impactful with this commander, and ones that can generate you mana are incredible, and this one generates you 2 mana when you sacrifice a creature, so yeah, there are plenty of times when you blitz creatures in that you can actually net mana. Next up, Food Chain is a $50 card. Okay, well technically $49.50, but it is very impactful with this commander if you build the commander in a certain way. Food Chain is an enchantment that says, exile a creature you control, add X mana of any one color, where X is 1 plus the exiled creature's mana value, spend this mana only to cast creature spells. If you want to get your cast count for your commander up quickly, this is an incredible way to do it. You get your commander in play, you exile it, and then you make 4 mana. You just pay 1 more mana to cast your commander again. Then you get your commander back in play, then you're only spending 3 mana to recast it, and you see where this is going. You can get the number of times that you've cast your commander up incredibly quickly once this is out. But yeah, it is a $50 card for a reason. And speaking of a $50 card, the Great Henge, I did not realize has gotten over $50, but it is definitely an incredible card. It's a legendary artifact that costs 7 green, but you're never going to be paying that. It says, this spell costs X less to cast for X is the greatest power among creatures you control. It taps for green and you gain 2 life, and whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield on your control, put a +1 counter on it and draw a card. So again, you've got plenty of creatures with a decent amount of power in this deck, and yeah, if you just need to blitz out a few creatures to actually reduce this down to just costing 2 mana, great, because then you can just tap this for 2 mana to get that mana back essentially and gain some life. But more importantly, outside of just being a fantastic mana rock, by getting non-token creatures into play, you get them larger and yes, draw a card every single time. Yeah, there's a reason this thing is $50, and yes, if you have the budget for it and you want to include it with this commander, it can be absolutely incredible. Speaking of which, Pitiless Plunderer, which in comparison is a lot cheaper, but it's still pretty expensive at $11.66. It's a 1/4 human pirate that says, whenever another creature you control dies, create a treasure token. Obviously, this can be very impactful in a deck that is looking to get creatures out and sacrifice them for value. And of course, in combination with some other things, obviously we can go infinite pretty easily. Next up, a large creature that you might want to consider with a big effect is Cultivator Colossus. It comes in at $22.88, and it is a star trampling plant beast that's power and toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. On top of that, when it enters the battlefield, you may put a land card from your hand on the battlefield tapped. If you do, draw a card and repeat this process. Again, with the number of cards that we can draw, we can easily have a good amount of lands in our hand, and also, draw into some lands with this too to just dump a ton of lands into play, and this can hit really hard as well. Next up, some absolutely brutal upgrades to consider are Great Pact at $32.31 and Dictative Erebos at $15.34. Each of these are essentially the exact same card, well, with a minor difference or two, but yeah, Great Pact says whenever a creature you control dies, each other player sacrifices a creature, and Dictative Erebos says Flash, whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Essentially, these are enchantment versions of Butcher of Malakir, and yeah, these can be incredibly impactful and help keep our opponents' boards clean. Once set up properly, it's going to be very hard for opponents to keep absolutely anything in play. And finally, one more card that I want to highlight that can keep your own things in play is Heroic Intervention. Currently, it's $11.54, and it's an instant for 1 and a green that says permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. This is one of the most efficient ways to protect essentially your entire board from the vast majority of things, and yeah, this thing is incredible, and there's a reason why it's over $10. Now, keep in mind that you can find the links for these upgrades in the description below, and they are broken out by those different budget categories. So there's a link for $2 and less, there's a link for between $2 and $10, and there's a link for $10 and more. Also in the description below, there's a link for some potential cards to remove for some of those upgrades. Again, when you're adding cards into your deck and you're taking cards out of your deck, there's a lot of factors to consider. It comes down to your playstyle, your personal preferences, and your meta, so make the decisions that are right for you. There's absolutely no right or wrong way to upgrade a deck. So make the decisions that you want to make. And with that, the show has come to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So make sure you comment below and let me know what your thoughts on this episode are. And as always, thanks again and have a good one.